the name of the values that keep you alive. Do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, and those who have never achieved his title. Do not lose your knowledge that man's proper estate is an upright posture, an intransigent mind, and a step that travels on limited roads. Do not let your fire go out. Spark might replace the spark, and the hopeless swamps of the approximate, the not quite, the not yet, the not at all. The world you desired can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It's yours.
Welcome back to the Cryptoconomy podcast. I am today your host, William Harrison. I'm with Enrique Sotomayor, our co-host. Enrique, bienvenidos.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and today we're going to go through some state of the news, some stuff about Cryptoconomy, the Atlas Digest, our projects, and then we're also going to take a deep dive into postmodernism, its underlying causes such as Marxism, and maybe some criticism of that, and also our hero on the right, the father figure of YouTube, Jordan B. Peterson. So first of all, Enrique, do you have anything to start us off with? I know we have a pretty full podcast today.
Yeah, I guess a recap of Cryptoconomy. We're getting really close to releasing Atlas, and the whole idea of Atlas, it's an app that lets you track the value of the cryptocurrency's prices in real time. You can have your portfolio on there. You can manage multiple portfolios. You can manage it from multiple devices. You can follow traders. It's similar to Delta, but also similar to Seeking Alpha, in that you can read people's analysis and their claims as to why they take certain positions. You can follow traders, and then additionally you can participate in paper trading competitions with these traders, view their portfolios, backlog some of their claims, and see how good of an analyst they really are. So we're getting really close to releasing this.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've been following it since the inception, really, and seeing the progressive has been pretty cool. I know that crypto fantasy part that's going to be coming out in the future version looks very cool as well. Just before we go ahead and get started too, I'd like to just add a new section to the podcast where we kind of just recap the top 3 cryptocurrency prices, and then also the U.S. public debt, because everybody likes hearing how much debt we're in. So Bitcoin right now is about $7,500, down from the high. I think, what was the high this year? Was it did it hit 18,000 or was it 17,500?
It was like 19,000, something like that in December.
Okay.
And I think January it was around 18 or 17.
Okay. Awesome. And then Ethereum down at about $580, and then Litecoin at about $122. U.S. public debt, the national debt stands at $21.1 trillion. Not too bad. And then the outstanding total, which is of course the federal government and then all the state and local governments combined, as well as some additional factors, stands at about $70.2 trillion. And the unfunded liabilities for the future is about double that. So
So we've reapproached 2007 or pre-2007 numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Not too bad, but actually, yeah, pretty terrible. But the thing is about the public debt, not to get sidetracked on a tangent here, that's what we're really good at Cryptoconomy, is going on tangents. But I don't really think that the debt is that much of a bad thing. I used to, as a libertarian, or at least a former libertarian with a fedora-wearing atheist, I used to think that, well, just kidding, for the record, I never wore a fedora, I never will. I always thought that the debt was some big number, like the boogeyman hiding in the closet that was going to jump out and then attack us at some future. But there's the case to be made that it's actually a good thing. But I don't want to go too far on that. If you want to comment on that, you can real fast. But
yeah, I'll restrain myself on that.
Okay, gotcha. So let's go ahead and dive into the state of the news. So the first thing, and probably the biggest news break today, is that President Trump canceled his Singapore summit with the dictator or chairman of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, after, I guess, the Kim Jong-un's one of the military commanders of North Korea launched a bunch of insults and invective at the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, and also claimed that they're going to destroy us with their Hellfire, their single nuclear bomb that they have.
Right.
And Trump issued some long letter. I mean, did you read that letter that Trump sent?
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
They were citing Pyongyang's open hostility and like insults towards our second in command. I thought that was pretty impressive for Trump to write a letter.
I agree. I thought it was a good move too. I mean, I do want them to meet, but I think that you do need to meet. If you can't meet without preconditions when you sit down at the table, you have to go with something in your pocket that you want. You have to go expecting something that they're giving up.
It doesn't seem like a good idea to go into negotiations from a position of weakness, and it's much better to pull out before going into the negotiations if you're not going to get anything out of it than to go in and not get anything and then get ostracized by the media.
Exactly, because when you go in without a precondition, I mean, the number one thing that they want is for the U.S. to withdraw troops from South Korea and to stop these annual war games that we have. And going in without any other conditions of our own kind of implies that that's something that we're willing to take off the table, and I think Trump has stated as such in the past. But do you think that this is going to be rescheduled now, or do you think this is just completely off the table because we've kind of accomplished everything we want to in North Korea, it seems?
I don't know. I think Kim Jong-un has shown that he's not the character that we think he is. He was made such a villain, and then out of nowhere it came out that, like, hey, he's actually willing to entertain a conversation. Now he crossed the DMZ and he's meeting with the South Korean President Moon, and then, like, suddenly, just as fast as he swung to openness to this conversation, he started insulting us again. But they still followed through with their pledge to blow up the tunnels at their main nuclear site. And then just hours after that, Trump announced the summit would be canceled. So I feel like they probably feel burned in the sense that, hey, we did something out of the norm and we still didn't get what we wanted. But they'll probably come around to realize that it's a response of, it's in reaction to their response that this was canceled.
Better to be burned figuratively than literally, right?
Yeah.
With our extremely huge, listen, we got the biggest nuclear arsenal. Terrible Trump impression, but
yeah, I think Trump said when asked if this would further escalate hostile relations, I think he said, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, also Kim Jong-un meet with, was it Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister? I think he embraced him as well, and that was the first India being very, very hesitant to forge new alliances and relationships. And I know one of Trump's initial actions as president of the United States when he first took office was to reestablish a firm trust with India instead of siding with Pakistan, which Obama had done previously, or Obama had tried to even the table with Pakistan. Not really sure about that. Personally, I'm not really too familiar on those relations. I know they're very hostile on that western border, but as far as the eastern border goes with China, there's also a little bit of hostility with China with those border constraints. But we'll see how that plays out within the next couple of weeks. Moving on, this was an interesting case. This district judge in New York ruled that the president cannot block people on Twitter, and this is just a hilarious ruling. I mean, you got people on the left defending the president too. I mean, to get people on the left like Washington Post and Wired magazine to defend the president on Twitter, with the use of Twitter nonetheless, is something that's
does this mean that Twitter's now a public forum and they have no right to block me from trolling?
Exactly. Does this mean that you're not allowed to selectively choose with whom you speak? I mean, this illustrates perfectly. I know this is kind of a ridiculous case, but
it's another Clinton the appointee just demonstrating they don't know computer things.
Exactly. Is it really? The Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald, somebody from Germany, looks like. But this just illustrates the divide between the interpretation of the First Amendment and kind of the reason that it's so hard for people on the right and left, especially the farther you get out to the wings of the parties, to argue with each other, because it's easy to argue when you have a shared understanding of basic interpretation of words and their meanings. But when you don't interpret things exactly as how they're written, or if you see something different than somebody else does at its root level, then you can't ever have a dialogue with him or her. And this illustrates that the people on the right, or at least I personally, and I know Enrique probably shares this interpretation with me, and you can comment in a second, is that the First Amendment means that you have the absolute right to free expression, provided that there's no direct threat to somebody's life or well-being.
Right.
But the people on the left, or at least some people on the left, and illustrated by this court ruling, believe that the First Amendment provides you with the opportunity to be heard, or the right to be heard. Do you have any thoughts on that? Specifically pertaining to like how we move forward with an interpretation of the First Amendment where one side believes that it means you have the right to have free speech. I mean, this could also play into hate speech as well, that you have the right not to be offended, you have the right for your opinions to be heard, and that's kind of what is illustrated. This ruling illustrates, in my opinion. I mean, this is really a significant ruling.
I really didn't think about this ruling too much. I thought it was just another one of these, like, whatever Ninth Circuit judges standing up and being defiant to Trump. But now that you say it really does highlight, like, the First Amendment battle that we're fighting, and how the left thinks that they're the pro First Amendment party, but so does the right, and it's kind of how do we reconcile these two views?
Yeah, and I mean, all credit where it's due. The left was certainly the party of free speech in the 60s. I'll grant them that. They were certainly standing up for the right to free expression when the conservative right, especially the Christian right, the moralist right, were trying to cancel late shows. They're trying to get, I think, South Park scheduled to be a late show so their kids wouldn't get, they wouldn't get infected by the mean spirit of South Park, right? And of course, that's completely flipped. And I'll admit when I'm wrong here, because I used to always think that this whole idea that the parties flipped in the middle of the 20th century was ludicrous. I still think that it's over-exaggerated a bit, but the fact that the party's flipped so much on moral issues and on free speech issues now, like the conservative right of today is basically the left of the 1960s as it pertains to free speech. I think that can also mean that, yeah, it's possible that parties can flip and become bipolar opposites of each other just in the snap of a fingers, at least what appears to be the snap of the fingers retrospectively. So that'll be interesting to play out in the future. Continuing on, the informants within Trump campaign, I guess this is the very interesting thing. I personally don't know how to interpret this. If you want to take the ball from me here, what's going on with this quote-unquote spy, or as the left would have informant within the Trump campaign? What's going on with that?
Right. Well, even CNN and leftist publications have published that it is confirmed there was an Obama-era informant planted as early as 2016 in the campaign. And of course they rationalized that they have their reasons. We thought he was connected to Russia. We weren't spying. We were just planting or pushing our plant in order to confirm or deny that there was foreign or an attempt by a foreign state to influence our election. It seems like you could rationalize anything, and that's what the previous administration is doing. But what's incredible is that this isn't even in the news. We were all just caught up with the royal wedding and caught up with all these other things that we didn't even talk about. The fact that, yes, these conspiracy theories that we called Donald Trump out for, like tweeting about these conspiracy theories, seem to be confirmed. And not only have we confirmed them, but like it gets even worse. That like Mueller is apparently not coming after Trump, and then Kushner gets his security clearance. It's just been a week of like the swing, with the pendulum has been swinging, and now the tide that seemed like Trump could never surpass seems to be pushing him forward.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, going back about a month and a half ago when Kanye had his whole spiel with the press, I think he actually single-handedly doubled the black support for Trump. Trump, I think, did he break 50%? Am I correct in that?
Yeah, those are the numbers that like Drudge report.
Okay, like Rasmussen.
Right.
Yeah. Right, his supporters, okay. But still, he's still breaking barriers that he hasn't before. So I know that the Bloomberg had an article recently saying that this blue wave is turning into an actual blue battle, that it's not a blue wave anymore, that it's actually going to be difficult. And considering the precedent of midterm elections in the first term of presidencies where the incumbent, the opposite party of the incumbent, has the upper hand in most cases, it's starting to fail now. I mean, even when Democrats
there's a couple things
silver platter.
Yeah, there's a couple things at play here. Like, one, if somebody who gets elected into office who a bunch of people disagree with, then that's a very clear opportunity for us to form a coherent statement or coherent argument against him and stand up, and maybe that's a clear opportunity for us to, or like for an opposition or resistance type of party to mount. So I feel like the left had a golden opportunity handed to them, but the problem was that there's these extremists on the left who just keep going further and further out and diluting the argument, diluting the potential, keeping a concise, rational argument against Trump. So instead, the left just further discounts their possibility of ever standing up.
And then, I mean, this is probably my favorite story of the week pertaining to what you're just saying about rationality, is that when President Trump called MS-13 gang members animals, and then Nancy Pelosi comes out and says, does he not believe in the spark of divinity in every human being? And then just a week later, an MS-13 member named Animal, that was his name, gets arrested and sentenced to 40 years. So it's just too good. But getting more into news that actually kind of matters more. You were talking to me before the show about Bitcoin Gold experiencing a 51% attack. Can you go into that maybe?
Yeah, Bitcoin Gold is currently experiencing one of the nightmares any cryptocurrency could ever think of. I think the current market cap of all Bitcoin Gold is hovering at around like 785 million, and it's currently under a 51% attack. And a 51% attack, for those of you who didn't see the latest episode of Silicon Valley, is where you try to take control of a cryptocurrency by taking control of its consensus algorithm and taking control of having the majority of the miners. Once you control the majority of the miners, then you can decide whether to push new software or not to push new software. You control the consensus. So once you have 51% of the mining power or hash rate, you can theoretically spend a coin twice or perform what is called a double spend problem. So if somebody does manage to gain 51% of Bitcoin Gold's hash power, then they could spend money that isn't actually theirs.
Okay.
So
So
that's
assuming
what's
this does
currently
happen-
going on. And I think the actual way that is going on, it's kind of complicated, but people are taking advantage of advantage of exchanges that automatically accept large deposits. And then what they do is they deposit Bitcoin Gold into an account. They trade that Bitcoin Gold into a bunch of other currencies, and they withdraw these currencies. And they've figured out like they have some sort of advantage with these exchanges. I think the exchange that's currently under attack or that's being used is Shapeshift.
Shapeshift. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
So Shapeshift is one of these exchanges where it's like, hey, I bought Bitcoin and I'm trying to get Ethereum and Ripple out of it, and here's the current exchange rate. I don't actually have to participate with an exchange and like exchange fees or anything like that. I could just break my one coin up into these two other coins, and that's
Okay, so it's kind of like a token system then.
Yes, it's a clever swap mechanism, but people have figured out a way to like, Bitcoin Gold isn't anything, although it's a fork of Bitcoin, it's not anywhere near as competitive to get 51% of the hash power. I think Bitcoin miners contribute like something in the order of like 1 million times more processing power than Bitcoin Gold miners do at the moment. It's either 1 million or like 10 million. It's somewhere in that order of magnitude.
Okay. And was this fork that you mentioned, was that the same, was this the August 1st fork last year where it was Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin? Was it all the same fork, or was it a separate fork?
So they came one staggered after the other. It wasn't all right away. So Bitcoin Cash came as a result of segregated witness, which is a SegWit. And then there was a plan for SegWit 2, which never came. That was in November, and that's when Bitcoin Cash saw a big run up. And that's exactly like around the day when Bitcoin Cash was listed on Coinbase. But these all were forks of Bitcoin or spin-offs of the original cryptocurrency Bitcoin. But they didn't necessarily come this exact same day, but they came one after the other.
I see. Okay. So
And
assuming this 51% attack is successful, and I don't really know the details about this, but assuming it is successful, that basically just kills any cryptocurrency, right? Once you have a 51% attack, and once something actually comes out
it kills
of
that fork, correct. Once one person controls all the mining power there, well, there's no reason for you to go out and buy this token, because that it's the same thing as going to get a dollar lent to you by JP Morgan. Well, it's on their ledger. They can change that dollar to $2 or to $0 if they want to. Once you're buying Bitcoin Gold and one single actor controls 51% of the mining mechanism, well, there's no guarantee that you can log in tomorrow and still have your one Bitcoin Gold. They can spend yours.
This to me is like highlights the problem that pretty much every proof of, I don't know if it's just proof of work, but it could be proof of work and proof of stake currency faces during its growth period, right? Because there is a period where every cryptocurrency is vulnerable to attack, right?
Definitely.
Assuming that you don't,
and actually this highlights an even bigger problem, because originally we thought the problem was like, hey, it's really hard to kickstart your cryptocurrency, but once you get a cryptocurrency started, then it's not that hard. Well, here, like, they just forked off Bitcoin. Bitcoin did the hard work. It got started on its own. It passed the critical like inflection point, at which point it didn't make sense for people to try to attack it. It cost you more money than you could gain. So Bitcoin survived long enough, and then something can fork off of there, and you think, hey, this new cryptocurrency no longer has to go through this kickstart period where they need to control their own consensus mechanism privately before they get big enough to make sure that they can't be susceptible to 51% attack. Well, wrong. Even when you fork off the biggest cryptocurrency, you are still susceptible. And it makes sense because it's ridiculous to me that we live in a world where a fork of Bitcoin that nobody fucking uses, Bitcoin Gold, is worth $700 million. That's unreal. So that just puts downward pressure on that token. It says, hey, this thing is worth $700 million. If somebody can find a way to game and gain 51% of the mining power, then you can potentially extract as much as the market will let you before the price tanks. So that's what's going on.
This is my confusion. I'm so perplexed when I go into like IDEX or other exchanges and I just see this like 50,000 different coins and they all have huge market. I'm like, where did this value come from? It's kind of like when people value new tech companies. I mean, we went through this back with Tudor, where it's like, okay, why are we valued at this? What does this value come from at? And this is just an ignoramus point of view because I've taken like 2 economics classes in my life, so I don't really know where the actual valuation comes from. So
this is actually the perfect segue. Yeah. So you would think that prices are set, like the market sets their price, right? There's no price fixing. No person sets the price. Supply meets demand, and that's what the price is. But honestly, like this conversation we've been having, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately, I really don't think we live in a free market. That does seem that there is a lot of price fixing in the sense that the market always goes up. When have you ever seen the market go down? And even if it goes down, like everybody tells you like, oh yeah, just buy, like it's about to go back up. Like the market always, and that's not a market. It's a stock, but it's not a market. Like how can we buy something that's always going to go up? And the fact it's gone from like 16. Well, let me look it up. What was it at 2007? But it's almost doubled. The Dow Jones has almost doubled since it was like 2007 when we were at new recession
like 8,000, didn't it?
Yeah, we were at like at 8,000. We're at maybe more. Let me see.
Yeah, and this is actually, I mean, we'll touch on this later with postmodernism and Marxism, but that was one of Marx's fundamental claims about capitalism is that it's so predicated on growth that once you actually run out of the finite resources and supplies that the earth has to offer, then you don't have growth anymore. And what happens when you don't grow anymore? You have a catastrophic collapse. And that's one criticism where I think that he was actually completely right, is that we're not just predicated on linear growth, we're predicated on growth more than the growth last year. It has to be a continually improving growth. So the growth has to itself be growing. And this is why, like, even though I have a lot of criticisms about the Federal Reserve, I think that the idea that you have a set interest rate and you have a set growth rate and expectations, I think that's a good idea to rein in a kind of system that's supposed to be exploding all the time.
Yeah, but think about this. Trump announces we're going to have a Singapore summit, the stock market goes up. Trump announces we're not going to have a Singapore summit, what's the stock market going to do? I bet you it doesn't go down. Like, we have Brexit, the market goes down, the market goes right back up the next day, and everybody's like, what Brexit? What does it even matter if, like, they're part of this EU or not part of the EU? The rules are all made up. We'll adjust them anyways. We have an infinite number of mechanisms we could always introduce to adjust. So, like, the market always goes up, and it makes no sense. But I think cryptocurrencies highlight, like, the extreme part of it. It's like, how the hell is this, like, random token worth $800 million? And it's because we're not using the right metrics to define them. We're just multiplying. We're being brutes and just saying, like, hey, how many coins are there? What's the current price of one coin going for in one market that lives in a vacuum? Okay, let's multiply it out and see what the current value is of this whole chain. Well, that's not a good value approximation mechanism because you'll never be able to extract that value from that.
Yeah, like I'm personally working on, I mean, I love the idea of blockchain and I love the code behind it. I'm working on some myself, but I'm going to stay away from currencies as long as I can because I have no idea what goes on. I like the idea
currencies
of
are the carrot at the end of the stick. It's like the best use case you could potentially think of a blockchain technology that just
like a public
motivates us to, like, hey, let's start finding a billion different permutations of this technology and see where else is applicable, where else it could, like, reduce inefficiencies.
That's fair, yeah, but it seems like that's a retrospective comment because at the beginning it all started with the currencies, right? And I give credit to Bitcoin for popularizing the blockchain model. But I think that there are it's like 99-1, the ratio of applications of blockchain that aren't feasible or not maybe that aren't feasible or just aren't important. Like why do you need the extra work for that? Like it's just a database, right?
Yeah.
You know, like I see so many, I wish I had examples to roll off because I feel like I'm just, talking out of my ass right now. But there's so many applications of blockchain where people just completely, they close their ears and put blinders on once they hear the word blockchain and they throw like $10 million at an idea.
Yep, it's the new buzzword. It's the new AI or machine learning or whatever.
Exactly, or VR or whatever.
Yeah.
The only person I've heard agree with me that VR is a fad is Thomas Middleditch on Silicon Valley, and that's not really a good company, so I'll have to have somebody explain to me more about that. But and maybe taking a step back here, I'm sure you've read about these new NFL anthem rules, right? Kind of controversial decision that Goodell and the 32 team owners of the NFL, which actually constitutes kind of like the board of the league. I think there actually is a separate board, but the 32 members of the league are all those are the people who decide what goes forward. And so I know they made changes to the kickoff rule, which is just another permutation of this dumb kickoff rule, which I think should be completely scrapped. But that's for a separate discussion. But now that the NFL is requiring players to stand if they go outside, but they're also permitting them to remain in the locker room with the rest of their team. I personally think this is a wrong move. I think that this is so clearly just for their own pocketbooks, and it's so obvious that it's for their own pocketbooks. Like, my opinion is that I want people to stand for the national anthem, but if they're going to kneel, like, I really don't care.
Right.
What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's two sides of the argument. One, I don't think that the owners are, like, racist or motivated by, like, patriotism or anything like that. They're motivated by the bottom line, and they lost a lot of advertisement dollars. They lost a lot of ticket sales and whatever food commissions.
Right,
whenever
8% down viewership.
Right, whenever there was these protests going on. So I think that they're motivated to like reduce any social commentary on behalf of the players, which I don't necessarily oppose. I feel like they're fucking football players. They should play football,
Right.
and it's like me trying to go get my news from like a celebrity. I don't really care about their social commentary. They don't represent the majority of the people. So on that hand, I'm like, okay, well, good for the owners for coming together and saying like, hey, like we have this this vulnerability of ours, if you will, that this is the fact that we're losing out on the potential that we could potentially gain because we're allowing these players to have such influence during this important moment. But at the same time, standing for the pledge is no longer standing for the pledge if it's forced. So
Great point. Yeah.
if you're gonna force people, I mean, I don't know. What do you do though in this situation? What do you do if you're Roger Goodell in the NFL? Do you not decide to, or do you decide to not force people to stand, and then you have another year of people sitting and kneeling and making a show of the national anthem and
Exactly.
sales lingering off? At least you're part of the conversation for another year, but sales are going to linger, and then you open the door for the NBA to keep catching up to you. And I think this is kind of a forced move. This was another one of those, like, the market set this move. It wasn't that these people are like motivated by racial like injustice or want to be like whatever bullshit that people claim. I think it's just the bottom line is money.
The problem is this issue is going to get rehashed again next year, because what you're going to have is all these players are going to sit in the locker room and be in solidarity with the other players who remain in the locker room.
Yeah,
so
but I think America will get tired of it. I think we'll realize, like, I don't give a shit. Like, how does it affect me if somebody kneels during a fucking... Like, and okay, there's other people who have served for the country and have done a lot more than I have, and like, salute to them, but like, they can turn off their TV if they don't want to be disrespected. And I don't think it really, it's just like the Jordan Peterson and transgender argument, where we pick somebody to like be the victim of it and we never stop to ask them how they actually feel about it. So I feel like we're gonna get it's really, I don't know, like, for whatever reason it became the meme, like the NFL people sitting and staring, that became the meme that was so important. But memes burn and die real fast, so I think the probability of it sticking around for a whole nother football season is 0.
Yeah, I really hope so too. I mean, it's not that I don't care about the issue. Personally, I think that the police in America, and I have all due respect for police officers, but I do think we need to have some more rigorous training. I don't know if there are enough police officers to warrant that, at least enough that want to become police officers. But I mean, in my opinion, the fact that there are a lot of obese police officers and that a lot of police officers use excessive force, and it's not, I mean, the statistics say that it does not disproportionately affect black citizens. I mean, that's beyond the point of debate. It's completely false. The problem is that we have police officers who are able to wield the force of the law and are able to have license to kill, but they don't have the same strict impositions as a military, right? So I think that if you join the police force, you should at least adopt some of the strict employee guidelines, but at least a strict work environment that a military personnel might have.
You just want the military state, don't you?
I'm just authoritarian. I just want military parades all day. You know, Trump military parade. I want that to happen. I mean,
hey, whatever happened to that? I thought we were gonna see one.
I guess he just, I don't know. I think some of the stuff he does, it's either it just comes into his head and he just tweets it out, and then he just loves just getting people riled up, or he secretly thinks like, what can I do to piss off the media today? And so he starts thinking like, let's celebrate our vets, and the whole mainstream is like, this would cost $200 billion. This is terrible. I mean, personally, I'm against. I don't think we should have parades unless we actually win a war, like World War II, right? But like, just the idea that you can get so riled up. I mean, it's hilarious. Like, speaking of the media, like this ridiculous story came out that this guy, Michael Rotondo, got evicted from his parents' house, and he actually kind of looks like Guilfoyle from Silicon Valley. I just found that so hilarious if you saw a picture of him. But he's this 30-year-old living with his parents, and he wasn't paying rent. He'd been living there for his entire life, and he claims that it's like, oh yeah, I've been doing my laundry and paying for my food, so I deserve to live there. And so all these like people like Brooke Baldwin on CNN have him on and start like saying like, why, you should get out of your parents' house, you don't pay rent. And this is the same media that would that would go and like start protesting against tenant laws in New York, where it's like, no, you're not allowed to kick out people from your place. Like, well, what's the difference? People are sort of. I mean, I definitely.
I think the fact he's a straight white male is part of the difference.
And he's conservative. He's self-proclaimed conservative.
Yep.
And so I think they wanted to jump.
He
on
lost that battle.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we can segue kind of into the more meaty matters here. Postmodernism, Jordan B. Peterson. I know we've touched on this in previous episodes, like the Memetics and Epigenetics podcast, which if you haven't listened to, It's music to the ears of anybody who's ever browsed 4chan or actually, I might have to retract that. I don't want to get censored by saying 4chan, but Enrique is kind of like the expert here on Jordan Peterson. He's the guy. I don't know anybody who knew about Jordan Peterson besides Jordan Peterson before Jordan Peterson came out into the public. So this guy is, I mean, sometimes I kind of doubt him, and then I will watch a video of him. I'm like, okay, no, never mind. This guy literally is the return of the Messiah. But I recently finished his book, 12 Rules for Life, which if you guys haven't read, definitely worth the $14.99 at Barnes & Noble. So go pick that up. Enrique, you want to go ahead and get us started with Jordan Peterson, or would you like to start with postmodernism and Marxism?
Yeah, so I think before we get into Jordan Peterson, I think it's important to understand why Jordan Peterson has been so successful and has been able to stand up and be like this right-wing intellectual, even though he's not right-wing at all. But he's just sort of been the counter-narrative, the icon that stands up as like the contrarian voice of reason in opposition to the mainstream narrative. I think the whole reason he's been able to do this is because he actually took the time to study postmodernism, and he uses parts of postmodernism against itself in order to turn it on its head. And one of the weapons of postmodernism, if you will, is this thing of inversion, of how like it has a lot to do. It's very similar to the Hegelian dialectic, and how something goes from one extreme to like the exact opposite of or from something to the exact opposite of it.
Right, the thesis to antithesis forming synthesis at the end.
Yep.
Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yep. So So before like you get into Jordan Peterson, it's important to get into postmodernism. And I think you probably know a lot more about postmodernism than me, but I just have a few notes here I wrote down. But it was a movement born in response to modernism, and modernism was a movement born in response to the industrialization. But like as the world used to be ruled by monarchs, and technologies made it easier for the general public to learn about abstract concepts such as philosophy, and then the general public began to get pretty frustrated with this monopoly that the monarchs had. So then the Enlightenment came around, and the Enlightenment was basically the red pill of the 1700s. And aside from like a hate towards monarchy and religious authority, it gave birth to concepts like liberty, freedom, constitutional government, deductive reasoning, logic, etc. And it went so far as to give birth to this idea of an objective truth, which now we might think of as totally insane. How can something can be objectively truth in this post-truth reality we live in? But believe it or not, the Enlightenment gave birth to that idea, and this industrialization period actually had a ripple effect. So there's a huge exodus from the rural communities. Large populations of people moved to urban communities. This gave birth to the middle class. The average Joe was now becoming more and more well-versed with philosophy. And then the modernist movement came up, and the modernist movement was born of like the age of reason and logic. And it was like it was a rise of rational thinkers who started to reject unprovable things like spiritualism and religion. So they thought of themselves as I think the way I worded this in a previous podcast was that they thought of reason as the highest virtue. So they thought like, hey, if we can't reason, or we can't think backwards and rationalize a reason for us to do this, and why are we doing this? So the easiest, the like low-bearing fruit would be like spiritualism and religion, and they started coming after this. But also, I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, that like Enlightenment had like at the very beginning of the Enlightenment, there was an innate hate of monarchy and religious authority, as it was used as it was used to symbolize the archaic traditionalism that underlined these social constructs that were actually keeping us bound to where we were at, and not letting us ascend, or not letting us be as free-flowing as we could potentially be. So there's this innate hatred towards this traditionalism and this religious authority, and then furthermore, we start to reject unprovable concepts like spiritualism. And we started to embrace more provable things like scientific method, and only believing what you can prove. And then this is what Nietzsche declared was like how we killed God. And it wasn't a celebratory declaration like, oh yeah, we killed God, hell yeah. It was more like, yeah, we kicked the metaphysical foundation of our society out from under us, and now our world is shaking.
Right. Yeah, this is exactly where I think Hegel is spot on, because just like the individualism and the self, I guess the responsibility that was so enshrined by Christianity kind of was turned against Christianity once the Enlightenment came about. It's the same way that the Enlightenment was the tools of the Enlightenment were used to discredit the Enlightenment by the modernists and later the postmodernists, because Enlightenment, as you know, like Kant was basically Immanuel Kant was a German thinker, and he was I think it was like 1780s when he was championing the use of reason. I mean, his famous quote was "Sapere aude," which is Latin for "have the courage to use your own reason." I mean, it's literally dare to know. But I think the idea now that the problem is with postmodernism is that a lot of its tenets actually make a lot of sense, right? There is no such thing as objective truth in a sense, right? But I think that the objective truth in the individual and the onus of the individual to be responsible for his or her own actions is the bedrock of Western civilization. And trying to continue on Western civilization without the bedrock is a really dangerous model. We've seen what happens, at least in Eastern civilizations, when the idea of the individual gets swept out while maintaining the individual in terms of legal and ethical codes.
So now you can begin to see the slippery slope from how we go
Right.
from hating monarchs to hating religious authority as a whole, to hating spirituality, to hating and having no faith in institutions and believing that the government is only there to protect power of the whatever parties and like at the top at the moment. And then we make like these super generalized arguments that like, hey, everything that we're doing is simply for power, and that's where postmodernism comes. So all I've been talking about up until now, this like modernism, that's pre-postmodernism. So the whole philosophy of the Enlightenment, that was the modernist movement. And then World War I, World War II came. We realized like, hey, this faith that we have in all these other isms, patriotism, capitalism, communism, whatever, could actually lead to our own downfall. We could kill ourselves with so much faith in these institutions. So we started reeling in our faith, and we started, as a direct response to modernism, postmodernism was born. And we no longer had a unified value system. We no longer had a unified moral system or unified identities. We no longer had any trust in institutions or government. Instead, all this structure was replaced with endless choice. Everything was a spectrum, and any interpretation you formed of reality was just as valid as any other interpretation anybody else could form. So I guess the two big tenets of postmodernism is that one, it's a response to modernism. It's a response to the alienation that we felt as a response to this industrialization movement. And two is that it points out the difficulty in finding a single overarching interpretation of the world. And this is where Jordan Peterson starts talking about the perception problem of AI. He every time like he mentions how postmodernists make the claim that there is no single overarching narrative of the world, that any interpretation that you make is just as valid as any interpretation I make. His example is this AI problem, that one of the biggest, most difficult tasks for an AI to do is the perception problem in order to be able to recognize objects, that for the longest time we thought the world was made out of objects, and that we saw objects and inferred functionality, and that once we started to try to form these AI systems, what we learned is we actually see function. We don't see objects. We live in a world of function, not in a world of objects. So when you see a beanbag, you're seeing a chair, not because it has it doesn't have four legs, it doesn't have anything, but you still see a chair. So you see function, and then you infer backwards the object, and you're able to maneuver your way through this world. So he uses that problem, this perception and framing problem in AI, that states that in order for you to see anything, you first have to create bounds. And then he begins to mention like John Piaget and some behavioral psychologists who very famously said like, hey, whenever kids engage in any sort of play with another kid, they first act out, like in order for you to in order for you to know anything about the ethics that you're a part of, you first act out what you think it is, and then you start interpreting or seeing what you think are bounds, and then even though a system is bound, there's still infinite number of roles you could play within that system. So this AI perception problem tells us that in order for us to see anything, we need to create our own bounds, and that's why it's called the framing problem.
I see. Okay, this is a really good example because it highlights the difference between, I guess, how we develop AI and how we actually perceive things. I mean, like you said, we perceive things in function, and AI tries to perceive to infer function from form. Like when I see a beanbag and a stump, I think this is the example that Peterson uses in his book, that you see a beanbag and a tree stump as the same thing, right? You can sit on that; they can both become a chair. But for for computer to be able to infer that commonality between those two, that would take a lot more. I mean, arguably would take a lot more processing power and a lot more time on behalf of its programmers to actually develop that. And,
I mean, we arguably are an optimized AI. It would probably take billions of years of evolution of that said AI to evolve and iterate and have all these different lives, where at one point it sat on a tree stump and at another point it sat on a beanbag, and then it realized, hey, I can sit on both of these, and then it abstracted the notion of a chair and it created that own notion just based on the information presented to it. If we are able to maneuver our way through life and abstract these notions, there's no reason that I don't really understand why artificial intelligence, what's real intelligence.
I guess real intelligence is not, it's just a moniker, right? It's just an adjective. I mean, it's there to distinguish what we've made versus what nature has made.
Right.
Which I guess gets into more. I mean, it's still a distinction that is going to be observed for at least another 100 years, I think, because we're nowhere close, in my opinion, to what scares Elon Musk in his worst nightmares when he's with Grimes. They both wake up and sing about it. Continue on to like the history of postmodernism.
Yeah, so postmodernism is like two main architects. Or the one I know the most about is Derrida, but there's also Foucault. But yeah, these are the two people that like get attributed much of. They get called the architects of postmodernism, but really they get grouped in with neo-Marxists, and this is where a lot of valid critiques of Jordan Peterson are made. That you can't. One is not the same as the other. So you're saying that like, hey, postmodernists don't believe in an overarching narrative of society, but neo-Marxists obviously do. They want to create a giant state. They do have an overarching vision or narrative of society. So how can you say that they're one and the same? That's an internal contradiction. And the other maybe not a contradiction, but the other step that I don't know if is a valid step is to say that like there is no difference between postmodernism and Marxism. There's only like a sleight of hand, which is we shifted from class warfare, right, from like conflicts within classes to instead be conflicts within identity groups of the oppressed and the oppressor, but no longer on economic grounds, now on these power dimensions. Let me see.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that to say that postmodernism is a direct consequence of Marxism is kind of false. And I think Jordan Peterson doesn't himself believe that. I think he simplifies in order to not have to repeat his exact structure. But like in my opinion, postmodernism does come largely from Marxism. It's just a redrawing of it. But there's a lot of tenets that have like a lot of parts of them have no similarities to the other. But continue on.
Right, yeah, because Derrida even like famously attacked equality. He said that like, so one of the big things that Derrida brought up was I think he called it deconstruction, and he used this like power of deconstruction with literature a lot to try to understand. There's an endless number of potential interpretations of any piece of literature. Like for instance, the Bible, you can interpret it at the resolution of the word or the sentence or the chapter, and therefore the conclusion was, well, there's an infinite number of ways to interpret the world. And the next conclusion was that there's no right way to interpret the world. And then they took it a step further, and this is where the Marxism crept in, that like people interpret the world in a way that facilitates their acquisition of power. And I was like...
Right. Okay, this is the guy that said, Il n'y a pas de texte, there's nothing outside the text, right?
Yep.
That's the famous quote from him, which is, I mean, it's so hard to argue against something like that, because even arguing is like, this is the postmodern, like the infuriating part of a postmodernism, is that when you try to argue with them, they don't claim that they're right. They say that, well, it's not important to be valid, because nothing could be valid, because there's no such thing as objective validity.
Logic-centric, like your argument, your whole philosophy is... premised on this like logic being your central axiom, this like and I mean they do have a valid point there, like it is something we have been saying as well, that like reason is no longer this highest virtue.
It's kind of like, I don't know if that's really ironic or hypocritical, because people attack Jordan Peterson for calling the logos male, and then the logos being the order of the male, like order spirit, feminine being the chaotic part of it. But then they go and say that the attack West for being phallogocentric, and that basically is saying that, yeah, you're right, the male part is logos. I mean, trying to argue postmodernism. I actually wrote like an essay about this for Cryptoconomy News, and just writing that took me so long because I was like, how do I even attack this? Because like every point can be just deconstructed.
Yeah, so postmodernism has some valid points that like, hey, the world is complicated and any set of phenomenon can be looked at in infinite amount of ways, and it's really hard to tell somebody that their interpretation of something isn't as valid as your interpretation of something. So there is valid ground beneath it, but like we were talking about, like when you see something, you extract function. So you have to extract out from the world a game that you can play, a game from your interpretation that you can actually play that's replayable, where other people are encouraged to play with you again in the future. The game, there are interpretations of the world that are more right than other interpretations of the world. There are interpretations of the world that could lead to players not wanting to play with you anymore in the future. And postmodernists seem to discount this. And then they don't even want to have a conversation about it, though. And it's no coincidence they don't want to have a conversation, because it's written into their philosophy. They regard the idea of two people from different power groups stepping out of their bounds and engaging in dialogue, where their worlds meet and produce some sort of negotiated understanding. They regard that as part of the oppressive patriarchal game. There's no way for me to step out of my power bounds. That is just a way for you, the oppressor, to like further enslave me.
It's so hard to, I mean, the problem is, like you say, there is a patina of credibility to postmodern. I mean, I even hesitate to use the word credibility because they would not use that word. So it's like, how do I even I mean, it's basically you just have to think it. You have to feel postmodernism. You can't think about it. You can't have a dialogue about it. You just have to feel it. If you don't feel it, then you're wrong, right? I mean, this is a quote. This is a ridiculous quote from Michel Foucault, which is one of the proponents of postmodernism. And this is just it's not a verbatim quote. There are patches missing in here, but I just kind of put it together. Quote, "It is meaningless to speak in the name of reason, truth, or knowledge. Reason is the ultimate language of madness. There is nothing to guide or constrain our thoughts and feelings, so it is our prerogative to do or say what we feel like. Deconstruction relieves the obligation to be right." And what they attack is the obligation to be right, that in order to win or validate your own opinions, you have to be proved right through dialogue. And I think that's what they attack most. But the problem is what happens when you get to that point where you don't have dialogue with people anymore. I mean, which is exactly what Jordan Peterson, when he rose to fame with that very initial video about Bill C-16 and the compelled use of transgender pronouns, that was his main complaint, is that the problem with these postmodern movements is that they want to deplatform people. And then, of course, the people were like, oh, no, we don't want to deplatform you. We agree with your right to speech. But then another person calls in, this transgender rights group called in and said, we didn't want to participate because we feel like giving a platform to Jordan Peterson validates his opinion. We don't want to do that. And it's like, well, there you go.
Yeah, no, that's the best way to put it. Even, like, engaging in the dialogue is an admission of failure. So there's no reason for you to engage in dialogue with anybody if you're a post-Marxist. It's not like all the sleeper cells, if you will, of postmodernism are operating consciously, like aware of the fact that they're operatives of this ideology. A lot of these people are operating and it's unconscious. They're just doing whatever everybody else around them is. The purest examples, like Antifa, these like squads of people masked up, destroyed cities, that it's not like they're necessarily like, hey, let's act out this very hypocritical position. I think they're just unconsciously acting out these roles.
Which is obviously, I mean, that's could arguably be the goal of the postmodern movement, right? They just want people to act out what they believe inside, and then the inverse hierarchies of the historical past will play out and everything will be inverted. But the problem is, like, once you invert those hierarchies, which arguably have biological precedent, such as like the quote unquote patriarchy, right? The idea that men are creative and work and women are orderly, or women are produce offspring and attract male, and then are there for the purpose of being mothers, while the men are there for the purpose of being fathers and providing for the family. What happens when you invert that? What is the synthesis of those antithesis and thesis? Like, what's the synthesis to that in your opinion? What happens next? How do we defeat postmodernism, or what happens if postmodernism wins?
Ooh. Well, I mean, we start to realize that there's truths on both sides. We start to realize that there is a reason for the symbolic language to exist. We start to realize that the religious substrate, like the metaphysical substrate of our culture, is somewhat something like a religious substrate, and we start to realize that this postmodernist deconstructionist view of reality is a direct assault on this metaphysical substrate. So the more we start trying to deconstruct things, the more we start to question the objective value of the symbolic language, the weaker foundation we're resting upon. So I think that's how we'll reach the synthesis. We'll realize that there are truths on both sides. There really is a pros to like at least entertaining the argument being made by like the oppressor or the oppressed. I mean, but there's also value in recognizing that tradition and orthodoxy and all these things that we're just repulsed by in the West actually exist for a reason, and religion exists for a reason, and religious language exists for a reason, and symbolism exists for a reason. So it's not that these people are archaic and stupid for believing in these concepts, but that there's a real reason for them to exist. So the synthesis will come in recognition of truths from both sides.
That's a perfect answer. I mean, you answered better. Like, if somebody had posed me that question, I'd be like, yeah, I don't know. But this is well, I was actually talking to one of my friends. He's a ardent leftist, and we have a lot of dialogue together, which of course is the great postmodern sin. And he always asks me, why are you conservative? Like, what's the point of tradition? And I said, well, tradition itself it's not some, like, it's not like tradition itself is not rational. And I pride myself on
what's the point of progress, rational. Right? Just ask it, what's the point of progress?
Exactly.
Is
That's
there like
exactly
an objective value to progress?
Yeah, it's like the problem with retrenching tradition and always wanting to retrench tradition is that there is a point where you do reach the pinnacle of progress. And conservatives argue, like myself, that we haven't reached that point yet, but that point is not something that's always reachable, right? We're not always progress itself is not inherently good. Progress is only good when the tradition is bad. But there are a lot of traditions that are good. Like, what about the progress that's happening right now? That establishes tradition. So in 50 years from now, is that going to be inherently bad just because we're trying to conserve a tradition that happened in the past? The problem with this is exactly the problem that Burke, I think it's Edward Burke, I think that was his name, the Burkean criticism, like the founder of conservatism back in the French Revolution. His criticism was that, okay, France has a tradition of being monarchical. Okay, France has a patriotic loyalty to the king, and if you try to retrench that and get rid of the throne overnight, then that's going to produce extremely bad problems going on in the future. And of course, he was proven exactly right with the Reign of Terror and the Thermidorian reign and everything that happened after the French Revolution, where tens of thousands of people lost their lives. And so the idea that tradition is something that we just discard because it's irrational, I mean, that just goes against every notion of humanity that we have, right? I mean, our entire past is built on tradition, and the future is also predicated on tradition. We can't have progress without underlying tradition.
Yep. But it makes sense why people hate tradition because right up until the point postmodernism was born, when modernism was still thriving, we had this idea of a unified concept of progress and development through logic. So anything that came with logic led to progress and led to prosperity and was innately better than like the lack of progress. So you start thinking, okay, well, like if logic leads to progress and progress leads to, obviously better than not progress, then why do anything that's not logical? Why subscribe to traditions where I'm asked to not even consider, I'm asked to just like blindly through faith, not try to reconcile the world that I know and the world that you try to push down on me.
Damn, a light bulb just went off my head. Something you just said like connected with me right there. The idea that logic itself could be traditional. Is that what you're saying? That the logic and reason were progress at one point, but now that they're tradition, then that's something that you're supposed to eschew because they're traditional, right? So
yeah,
that could be why. Okay.
It'll start to get really confusing because once we start attributing logic to tradition, then I don't know where we go.
Then progress becomes getting rid of tradition, or getting rid of logic, I guess. I don't know. It's just like a big word soup that I'm trying to like pick out the alphabet pieces out of, but I can't because every time you take a spoonful, like the rest just fall out of the picture. I don't even know what metaphor I'm trying to make right now, but it's just so confusing. So moving on to Jordan Peterson then. So Jordan Peterson likes to assail the postmodernist movement. He credits the Frankfurt School and other groups in France and Germany for having originated this idea. But there are also some criticisms to be made of Jordan Peterson's criticisms, right? And one of which being that, like we touched already, that it's not a direct progression from Marxism, but another of which being a criticism of Marx itself. So I mean, before I jump into that, do you have any more comments on the previous or of this itself?
Right, yeah. Like one of the big criticisms of Jordan Peterson's view of postmodernism is that he thinks it's despicable for Derrida or any of these like architects of postmodernism to have thought of such a philosophy, given that Marxism had already cost the lives of hundreds of millions or tens of millions at least. So he's like, okay, Marxism has already cost all these lives. How could you as a moral agent use this sleight of hand trick where you just replace class with identity and you push your Marxism in a new flavor? like how you're despicable for doing that, for just rebranding this ideology which has already killed so many. But there is a valid criticism to make of that. Well, like a lot, Derrida, for instance, was born in like 1930, died in 2004. Like he was alive and writing at the time when communist support in Europe was still very prominent. I think the Italian Communist Party came in second place up until like 1972, and the French Communist Party was like thriving up until the late 60s. So it's not Jordan Peterson saying like, hey, hundreds of millions of people had died of communism, therefore anybody who thought of communist philosophy is like this rogue moral agent. Well, there's a lot of people who are still proclaiming Marxist philosophy. So like, were they all bad guys? Like they still have we should still entertain their ideas. And then another more modern example of that is Slavoj Zizek, who's like probably the most famous modern philosopher alive today, and he's a self-proclaimed Marxist who hangs pictures of Stalin in his house and references a lot of Soviet era symbolism. Well, even though he has harsh criticisms, even more harsh criticisms of postmodernism than Jordan Peterson would have, he's still proclaimed Marxist.
Right. He criticizes identity politics a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah,
he attacks it from the left. Yeah,
definitely. But his interpretation of Marxism is a way more abstract interpretation than Jordan or anybody else will make. His interpretation is like, hey, it's sort of like what Justin was saying. Like, in order for you to like break out of a loop, you first have to recognize you're in a loop. The only way the proletariat would ever break out of this class struggle they're in is for them to realize that they're being oppressed and being taken advantage of. So I think.
Right, the kind of capitalist realist approach, like to be realist about capitalism, not hold it as some sort of high god. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, definitely. So that's like the most valid criticism I've heard of Jordan Peterson's views of postmodernisms. The fact that he tries to demonize Derrida and Foucault and all these people for creating this philosophy, because like, hey, you don't necessarily create a philosophy consciously. Like I might write something, you might write something, somebody else might write something across the world, across different time periods, and then later on we form those into like a cohesive library or volumes of a certain philosophy. But then like, that doesn't mean that like oh, how dare I for thinking of these ideas. So I don't really think that's a valid criticism of his, that like, oh man, Derrida is like a bad guy for but maybe that's a misinterpretation of mine.
I think it'd be fair to criticize people now for being Marxist, right?
Yeah.
Or at least being postmodernist.
Yeah, now.
But it's not fair to criticize the architects of it who were still living in that period
Exactly.
before the hundreds of millions of bodies were buried.
Exactly. Right? And then like we also have information latency, so you don't know how much they knew back then. You don't know if they were well aware of how many people Mao had killed or Stalin had killed or whatever. Maybe it took the Wikipedia age for that information to like trickle down to that everyday citizen.
Right. And there are two more criticisms with which I'm familiar and that I think have at least tentative credence, and one of which being that if you can lay the 100 million dead bodies at the feet of Marx, then shouldn't you be able to lay the hundreds of millions that quote-unquote killed by capitalism at the feet of John Locke, who propounded liberalism in its day? I mean, I personally think that's kind of a moot point because liberalism has succeeded so much, whereas Marxism has not at all. Real quick, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that you can blame John Locke? I see it too.
I like the argument. I like the fact that they're trying to highlight like the idiotic like idea of like, hey, let's attribute the entire consequences of this complicated system to like the ideas of one man and lay it all at his feet. And then because what this argument is doing is like, where do we stop? Is it just the negative that we're going to lay at somebody's feet, or are we also going to lay the positive, or are we only going to care about the net difference? So with John Locke, hey, a bunch of money has been made, a bunch of progress has been made, but also a bunch of lives have been lost in pursuit of capitalism. Are we going to subtract the two and like try to measure John Locke versus Marx?
Exactly. Like, John Locke, are you responsible for the 70,000 people who were killed in the Reign of Terror in France because they were subscribing to your ideas? Like, well, I personally thought that was, at least part of it's fair. The part that's fair is that you can't blame Marx for it. I mean, I get you to say Marxist, you automatically think of the guy with the carbuncles and the big gray beard sitting in that famous portrait, right? Yep. You think of, okay, that guy's such an evil guy, but
so it's a fair point
about a lot of stuff. Yeah, it is really fair.
Yeah, because what it says is like, it doesn't say like, hey, we should lay the faults of capitalism at the feet of John Locke. It says, hey, we shouldn't lay the faults of socialist implementations at the feet of Marx. Because at the end of the day, he wasn't an economist. He was an intellectual. He existed before economics as a field of study existed.
Yeah, I mean, where I think that you can go beyond this and respond to that criticism is I think Jordan Peterson should revise his critique and his attack and say maybe it's not Marx's fault personally, but it is the ideology, right? Just like it is the ideology of liberalism that rescued so many people from the destitution of feudalism and mercantilism and slavery.
Yep.
But I think that he definitely needs to approach that in a different way. I think that it's a somewhat moot because John Locke can be credited with much more than Marx can be credited with. I think one can credit Marx with the reformation of capitalism that occurred after the failures of communism, or at least the failure of the capitalism during the Great Depression. I think that Marx was overall a force for good in that realm, in that he got corporations and other governments to acknowledge the faults within capitalism and respond to them, because of course, like any absolute system is going to have bugs in it, right? Pure capitalism, pure free markets, that's not, I mean, as a realist, I think that's not going to work. I mean,
Right.
if anybody has an opinion on that, Ben Shapiro would sit there and pray to the god of capitalism with a dollar sign above his bed and say that capitalism works all the time, right? And there are many people who would do that, and my past self being one of them. But to lay it all at the feet of Marx himself, I think is an error that far too many people make in the modern age.
Yep, but
Another
Marxism is a
criticism-
direct
yeah, go ahead.
attack on individuality and on rationality and on clarity of mind, and it's like seems to believe that individualism is the source of conflict. So it's very hard to like know at what point like the substrate of our culture, where it's being assaulted by whom. So is this being assaulted by the Marxist ideas that are infecting us, or is this being assaulted by the post-modernist ideas? So it's very easy to see how those lines get blurry and how like
Right.
you end up substituting one for the other, and then it's, yeah, whatever, they're two different things, but I'm just going to call them both postmodernism.
Like, I don't blame the Peace of Westphalia for, like, back in, like, 1495, whatever it was, for the National Socialism, like, the excess nationalism that Hitler used to kill tens of millions of people as well, or at least over 10 million people. But I do think that it's better to at least attribute these deaths to a person who actually committed them. Like, if you're going to blame Stalin, if you're going to blame Marx, or if you're going to blame somebody for killing all the people in the Soviet Union, it should be Marx and maybe perhaps Lenin, or the people that followed Marx, or I mean not Marx, sorry, Stalin.
Right.
And the same with Mao and the Cultural Revolution. Same with who was it in the Khmer Rouge? I forgot his name. Pol Pot. Same with them. Like, if you're going to blame them, you should blame the people who carried it out incorrectly. Because in no way does Marx say, all right, in order for this, you have to go and round up all the kulaks who have a little bit more grade and kill them. Like, he never said that. So I do agree. I think that's, I mean, you've also actually helped shift my opinion on that, because I came into this thinking that it was completely moot. But at least it is fair to maybe not criticize John Locke, but the point is that you shouldn't be criticizing Marx.
Yep.
I mean,
Because that's too
there's
easy of
one-
an argument to make. It's like, oh, there's this one guy who had a bad idea. I'm just not going to think about it anymore. I'm just going to say that he had a bad idea, as opposed to me actually having to wrestle with his idea and realize why it doesn't fit in with our notion of reality.
It's the equivalent of like there's a Turning Point USA chapter here at University of Pittsburgh, and it's the equivalent of that sign. Like, the argument is the equivalent of the sign that says socialism sucks, and you go around waving that. It's like the really facile argument that you can make with just a few words. Like, oh, it's all because of Marx. Like, oh, you're a Marxist, you must be a mass murdering genocide wannabe guy.
Yep.
But the final criticism that I've heard, and this doesn't really have to do with Marx or individuality or postmodernism, but it's more of the idea of God existing outside the realm of the human brain. And that being, if I'm remembering this correctly, you might know more about this, but so stop me if I'm misremembering or misrecounting it. But there's in one of Jordan Peterson's speeches at one of his events, somebody stood up in the Q&A session and asked, if every person on the planet died, would God still exist? Right? Does God exist outside the realm of the human mind?
Right.
And
Well, do
Peterson did not
numbers
have an answer
exist?
there.
if an asteroid destroyed planet Earth, would 2 × 2 = 4 tomorrow? Would that hold true?
Yes.
Well, it's the same idea.
I think so. Okay, but the thing is, from my perspective, I can rationalize the latter a lot more than I can the former. So if you want to go ahead and try to explain that, like, what would happen with what is the God that Peterson believes in? And that's kind of like, because I try to adapt the God that Peterson believes into my own beliefs, being the hybrid of order and chaos.
Right.
But like, what's the God that Peterson advocates?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to speak for him, but I would think that it's something very abstract. I would think it's like that which transcends him, that which goes further than he can go. That's what like the higher ideal would be. And once you define God that way, then the most arrogant thing you can do is deny the existence of that which transcends you. So if everyone were to
so
die,
hard.
would something still exist that transcends me? Yeah, I think so.
I think so too. Yeah, it's so hard to answer it, like with the same. The problem is you assume the same or not the same reference, but the same like state of philosophy when you're asking, well, 2 × 2 = 4. That's personally. I mean, those are a really good example you brought up, because I personally believe that the idea of God is in the fact that numbers exist. I think that those are tied together. That the only thing that truly exists or transcends is like numerical distinction. That 1 and 2 are separate entities. But the problem is, like, I'm still wrestling with the idea that like the brain infers patterns where they really don't exist.
Right.
And the fact that like patterns might exist, does that imply that the patterns exist outside the brain, that hierarchy exists, or is everything just one? And that's something I'm probably going to wrestle with for the rest of my life, providing nobody comes down in the form of a burning bush and gives me a solid answer.
Yep.
So, I don't know.
But I mean,
think personally, that
I don't know where I heard this. Maybe it was Alan Watts, or it definitely wasn't Jordan Peterson. But somebody was trying to make the argument that, like, it was one of those like American philosophers trying to like explain Buddhism in like stoner terms.
Yeah, like Terrence McKenna.
Yeah. But I think what he was trying to say was like, yeah, everything is one, but a good simple way for you to think about it is like everything that you control is a part of you, and everything that controls you and you have no control over, you're a part of it. Then like, is everything one, or is there still this distinction of it and you? So I'm still kind of confused.
That just pushes the ball down the road, basically. Like every answer you could possibly get either just kicks the ball backward and moves it forward. So I don't know. It's something that, I mean, smarter minds than I have tackled with for thousands of years, and still haven't produced a viable answer that everybody can agree with. But I don't think there ever has to be. The point of disagreement is kind of the point of humanity, I think.
But I think we are going to make progress in these like religious and like theological arguments and like philosophical questions. We're gonna make progress despite us being in this era where we no longer actually believe religious progress is progress, which is kind of fascinating. Like I would not have guessed that in 2020 we'd have a big segment of the human bandwidth dedicated towards like YouTube philosophy and trying to figure out and grasp with the idea of the meaning of life. And like Jordan Peterson sort of like re-sparked this like desire for people to, maybe not desire, but maybe like took away some of the stigma some people automatically attributed towards studying religious texts. He kind of like made it seem like you can approach it more academically, and you are not associated with all this dogma that might be inherent with a religious faith. I'm just studying it for the psychological significance of it. So I think we, despite the fact that we're living in this time period where we don't see the value in tradition or orthodoxy, I think we're still wrestling with these ideas, and we're still going to make progress.
And progress being the utmost goal, right? Yeah, but I do agree with you. I mean, the fact that Peterson came out and gained such notoriety is the reason that we're talking right now. So, at least in my opinion, like the reason I got in, or at least I don't want to say get into philosophy because I'm no philosopher by any means, but like the reason I'm at least intrigued by it is because of Peterson, 100%. So at least we can credit him with that. And even Peterson's detractors and people who criticize him, the reason I've heard of their critiques is because of himself, which is kind of tautological. But
so
still, I think unless you have anything else to go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like I'm just thinking of like the fact that we're now willing to entertain the value in the symbolic language and in the religious language will lead to progress in some of these questions on, well, does life have meaning, or what is God? How can we, like, maybe before we were trying before modernism and before postmodernism, it was impossible for us to define a concept of God. We needed to go through modernism and then postmodernism, and then for us to have the ability to define God at like in the most abstract scientific terms, like that which transcends you, but also like have this like lens to look backwards and deconstruct it and make sure that we're not building like we're not glorifying something which can be easily transformed into a mechanism for authoritarian control of our society. So I think we are still on the trajectory to learn about God and learn more about our relationship with God, despite us being more and more modernist or more embracing of technology and discounting of the family.
Right, and one thing that Peterson often says is that he attributes a belief in God to everybody, and a lot of people attack that. But do you think it is true that everybody believes, at least in something, that it believes in a transcendental force?
Yeah,
that everybody acknowledges it. I really do think
it is
that's
a human
one part
universal. People have done studies and found that like tribes throughout the world, independent of culture, independent of geography, independent of all these different things, automatically like worships, either they externalize or they internalize the gods. The more primitive ones externalize and use nature as the domain of their unconscious to unfold some of these myths that they hold and let their gods live out there. And then some of these societies are further evolved, if you will, or further progressed in the fact that they internalize these gods, and they like reference Freud or Jung, and they try to like wrestle with the internal battles that we're fighting. But it's the exact same thing. It's this concept of a god or a higher order to whom you're completely subject to their whim.
Okay, yeah, I mean, like you said earlier, talking about the definition of arrogance is believing that you're the top rung of the ladder. I mean, I think everybody, the problem is like everybody has to go through that. I believe, like at least at some point, unless you're so committed to your faith, like everybody has to go through a point where you believe that you're the top in order to be knocked off the ladder. At least that's my personal opinion, because that is what happened to me. But I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. I think that's a really good place to leave.
Yeah,
things
let me
off,
see if I can find this quote. I think, man, yeah. I'm not going to be able to find it, but I think Nietzsche said something to the extent of convictions are more dangerous to truths than lies, or more dangerous.
Oh yeah.
Forms. Yeah. So he was saying like I'm not a man who stands on any convictions. For anybody who has any convictions, that is more dangerous than just telling me a lie. So
I like that quote.
Yeah. So I would say that I am not convicted to anything I said in this podcast.
Convictions are more dangerous foes of truth than lies.
Yep. I think that's from Antichrist.
Okay, that's the one you sent me that video on YouTube. I need to listen to that one. I'm trying to read Beyond Good and Evil right now, and it's just like sometimes I'll be reading a few sentences and I'll like some part of my mind will trail off, and I'll realize like I'm 2 pages back, and I'm like, wait a minute, do I know what I just read? And I just look back and I'm like, did I just read this? Like I don't remember reading this.
Yeah, Nietzsche is so dense. He says in a paragraph what others can't say in a book, and the problem with that is that it is way too hard to follow along when you're like cloudy and like not 100% there, not actually. Yeah, so I think the best way to read Nietzsche is to listen to his audiobook maybe like 3 times in the same time period that you're trying to read it. I just play his audiobook as I'm going to sleep or whenever I'm driving or doing random things, and then I'm still trying to read it because there's value in both. Like the audiobook, like it just inputs some of these ideas into my unconscious, and then actually reading, it's sort of like when you're at school and you were forced to like write down the notes that were like presented to you just so you could write it down and go through the motions and sort of embed those instructions a little further. I think that's the real value in reading, because now I can digest a whole like whatever 2,000 page book in 2 hours just by playing it at 3x speed. So yeah,
that's something a forced practice for which I'm very grateful now, because I mean there's a lot of truth to that. Like writing down notes actually does. I mean, I don't know if it's. I'm sure there's a scientific study on that. There's probably a bevy of them, but for me personally, I know writing down things is a lot better than either typing them or just hearing them. Like when I write things down, I find that I accept them a lot more easily, readily. So
Nietzsche is one of those writers who, like, if you just listen to his audiobooks, you're not going to get it all, and if you just read it, then like, it's going to take you a month to get it all. So the best best trade-off is something in the middle where you listen and read and keep listening, because there's probably 10,000 things you missed in there that would just shake your notion of reality.
Well, I think that's a great suggestion. I think I'll actually try that out then. I'll have to buy that book. It's called Antichrist, you said?
Yeah, Antichrist. All his books are like in the open domain, so you can find audiobook versions of them on YouTube for free.
Damn. I just paid for that other one. But yeah, and then I guess to conclude this discussion about Peterson, if you want to go, I'd suggest everybody go either listen to his podcast. He has a really fantastic section on the psychological significance of the Bible, split into multiple parts, which is, this gave a reading of the Bible I've never heard before, and it's really significant. It actually brought me back, at least to the ideas of symbolic Christianity.
Yeah, imagine telling yourself 3 years ago that you're going to be spending money this year, going to Toronto to watch some professor talk about the Bible. I would call you insane if you told me that, but now I'm actually willing to do it. If he had another series this summer, I would go down there to visit.
There's one in DC this summer, I believe, that I'm trying to go to, but so many of them are sold out now. It's like, damn. And I'd say if you want to, so that one's a good one. And if you want to hear some good critiques of Jordan Peterson, then I would suggest going to, Enrique, you showed me this one, Zero Books, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
Zero Books, it's a YouTube page. They're very, very hardcore leftists, but they also have the guys Slavoj and some of his points on there. And I think that's probably the best criticism.
Yeah, it's a good counter dose to just sucking his dick all day.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to like listen to, even though I don't even agree with anything that Zero Books necessarily says, I just like listening to somebody not worship Jordan Peterson for a minute, so I can be like, okay, well, the next time I hear him, maybe I'll take a little like maybe I'll discount his opinions and try to form my own opinion instead of just following his.
Yeah, like this is, yeah, exactly. This is exactly why I love being surrounded by leftists at universities, because I get to, I argue that my education is a lot better than theirs because I have to argue their points all day long. So like it's so easy to like isolate yourself in an echo chamber and just be surrounded by your own ideas all the time. But that's the worst form of debate is just keep regurgitating the same ideas without processing them, because the best way, in my opinion, to process an idea is to understand its counterpart.
Yep.
So with that, if you have anything else to say, go ahead.
Yeah, so hopefully more people like Zero Books start making videos, forming valid, coherent criticisms of Jordan Peterson, so we can start promoting them.
Exactly. And yeah, with that, I'd say go read that, try to take Enrique's advice, listen to Nietzsche 50 times,
and go clean your room.
and then read his book. Yeah, and clean your room. And pet a cat when you see it on the street.
Yeah, pet a cat.
And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Thanks again for listening to the Cryptoconomy podcast. We should have another episode out recently, or not recently, we should have an episode out soon with the founders of Oyster, and hopefully more with some frontier mining. We're looking forward to our partnership with them. But with that, I'd say have a good day, and like Enrique said, go and clean your room. Thanks for listening, and see ya. Bye, Enrique.